welcome to Freedom Fighters Code Grey. This is a show where we discuss human trafficking, an issue that's taking place in our communities. Over 50% of people who are trafficked in Canada are Indigenous. Why is this the case? How does colonialism impact human trafficking? And what can Canadians do towards reconciliation? Our special guest, Suzanne Smoke, will be addressing these questions today. Thanks so much for joining us today, Suzanne.
Bonjour, chimigwach for including me.
To begin, Suzanne, could you take time just to share a little bit about yourself as well as the work that you're involved in?
Sure. I wear many hats within the community. My first role, first and foremost, is I'm a mother and a life giver to my daughter, Cedar Smoke. That's her decolonized name. Her spirit name is Okamagi head woman of the sky world. And I've raised my daughter in ceremony since before she was born. And today she is a pipe carrier and a bundle carrier and visits the lodge and dances in our Sundance, and just a beautiful gift of life, and really made me who I am today as a mother. And then my second role within the community, I work with Muskoka Parry Sound Sexual Assault Services. I do Indigenous outreach. We do some education programs. And one of my main focuses recently is anti-human trafficking, understanding that MPSS sits in the Robinson-Huron-Williams Treaty Territories, and the 400 series highways are our main corridor and route for human trafficking, which leads to Treaty 3 territories. So our young women are being lured and targeted and hunted for human trafficking, and we're in the midst of that as an agency. So really just educating both my team and all the area agencies about that violence against Indigenous women and how we are dealing with it. And then I do other roles within the community. I work in mental wellness, and I also volunteer my time with Dash Mawan Bamatsajan, which is We Feed the People. And it's all about traditional sovereign foods. Ceremony is healing and feasting, and getting back to the land is all part of our healing journey. And that means working in relationship and building those relationships with all of creation. And so what are we doing to plant those sovereign foods? What are we doing to nourish our bodies with those traditional foods of our ancestors? So a lot of our women and all of our relatives, brothers, sisters, mothers, uncles, grandpas, aunties, are useless. They're out on the streets. And because of colonization, because of that trauma, and because of that violence of colonial legislation and the Indian Act, and all of those things that have put women in precarious positions, you know, they're out on the street. How can we feed and nourish their spirit? And if we can bring them beautiful wild rice casseroles and moose and bison, shepherd's pie and strawberry and cedar tea and things like that, and really nourish their bodies and help them, you know, in whatever capacity that looks like, then that's part of our role and responsibility as community. So I do, that's more of a passion in my heart, just to be able to go out and cook all those traditional meats and foods for our communities that are really struggling at this time, especially at this time of great sickness.
Wow. Yes. Well, Suzanne, it's so true, as you started off saying that you wear many hats. You absolutely do. And so it's just an honor to be able to learn from you today and from your experience in your various roles in the community. Suzanne, could you just take some time to share when you first heard about human trafficking or encountered it, as well as how you came to be involved in this type of specific work?
How I got involved in this work is I met a survivor. I'd known her in the community online, and she reached out one day. She had a speaking engagement and needed to go speak on anti-human trafficking, and she was really stuck. And I live north of the city, and I said, you know what, I've got the day off. If you're really stuck, let me come down to Toronto, pick you up, and we'll go to the conference together, and I'll sit and listen and hear about it, because it was happening in one of our local First Nations communities. So I really wanted to hear what was happening, and it's not too far from, and it's within my territory, one of the Williams Treaty territories. So I went and listened for the day, and as a knowledge keeper working with community and hearing disclosures in the lodge and in ceremony in different places where women and young girls come forward and speak to friends, not so much professionals. We were hearing a lot of trauma and that violence, not only within the communities, but our women in inner cities being targeted by non-Indigenous perpetrators. And so just really understanding that we needed to address it, and understanding that there's a lot of gaps and barriers in services There's a lot of bias and stigma and stereotypes and racism that's so deeply embedded within these systems that our women were being turned away. They weren't getting serviced. If they were, it was very judgmental and very harmful and very challenging. So many of them walk away from reporting, from seeking services. And so then that puts them in even further vulnerable, precarious positions. And for me, I really began to understand the high rates of the MMIW numbers. And, you know, the government says 1,200 and the RCMP releases a report that says 800 or 1,200 and then alludes that it's all our community members and our men that are doing it, even though that's not the case. And that's not what the numbers said. Really understanding that we know that all those cases and the number of unreported, there's been advocacy work within the community that those numbers are over 5,000. And we know that there's over 5,000 missing and murdered women in this country, probably exponentially higher. I would say 15,000 minimum, because we know of the unreported cases and unfounded, where police don't lay any charges at all in missing or murdered if the victim is Indigenous, sadly. So just so deeply embedded in these systems, our women are at risk. And so as I was hearing more and seeing that this is right in my territory, I wanted to act. And, you know, when I say spirits at work, the agency who hired this young woman to speak actually called me. They had seen me out on the streets in Toronto. There was a young girl that was missing. Her mom's from the community and a powwow dancer and was reaching out for help. And my girlfriends and I went down and said, we'll find her. And we went down in the streets. It was a week before Christmas and there was blizzards and we just went knocking on doors and trap houses and shelters and really bad, seedy places. And, you know, when the mom said, I know something's wrong, then we jumped to, you know, we're Bear Clan, we're protectors. We just did what we thought what we had to do. And we found her. And it was trauma. It was stressful. It was sad. It was, you know, feelings of relief that we got her home to mom. But that's not my role in community, and that shouldn't be anyone's role in community, is to go out and get our girls back. But that's what we had to do at that time. So the agency, Muskoka Perry Sound Sexual Assault Services, reached out to me and said, you know, we have a position up here. It's a little commute for me, which is 40-hour-a-week commute, 4-hour drive a day. But it's worth it, and I'm passionate about it. And for me, when I'm seeing girls downtown Toronto, they've already been victimized. They're already part of the system. They're already, you know, being preyed upon. And so can we have prevention strategies? Can we do education? Where's our cultural component to these healing and prevention strategies? And, you know, mainstream agencies are funded to heal First Nations people. But really, we're reeling and healing from Western civilization and all those colonial embedded systems. That's what we're healing from. So how can they heal us using all of their methods and not even hear or respect or value the voice of traditional Indigenous knowledge or our healers or our medicine people? And yet we're not funded for that in most capacities. So there's great changes happening right now within the communities, taking up those spaces in mainstream health and healing. But I just felt that more needed to be done. And so when they offered me that opportunity, I took it. And just really seeing, again, you know, the embedded biases, unconscious bias. I'm not saying that everyone that I work with is racist by any means. I think that it's happens for so long and so embedded in the system that people don't really understand how racist the whole system is and how biased and how it really negates our identity, negates and devalues us as humans. You know, Indigenous women are part of their men's property. We have no identity without being attached to a man according to the Indian Act. And I believe that only started to change in 2010, I believe, through Matrimonial Act, working with the communities. But, you know, the Indian Act has been in place since 1875, I believe. And so really understanding that all of that legislation in the Indian Act made us property of men. If we left from our community and married outside, then we lost our identity and we were no longer considered Indigenous. And yet at the same time, bringing European women into the communities and giving them status, essentially breeding Indigenous women out and bringing white women into the community or non-Indigenous. And when I say white, I look at our colors white, black, red, and yellow, the four medicine wheels. So in no way am I disrespecting, and some people don't like the term. So I'm going with what I believe in my heart, that Creator told the Red Nation we would be visited by three other nations of man. The Red Nation, the Red Nation would be visited by the Black Nation, the White Nation, and the Yellow Nation. And so even going back to that, like, you know, everyone comes with a gift. The Black Nation comes with the gift of strength and determination. And if we look at how they came to be here on Turtle Island through force and through slavery and all of those things, and escaping from those traumas and coming here into our territories, you know, look at, you know, that strength and determination, and there's such leadership within the communities, and even their physical bodies. I just think Black people are just so beautiful in their bodies, and they're very rhythmic and very sportsmanlike, and their very physical bodies. That strength is just such a beautiful gift. And for the Yellow Nation, the gift of that beautiful, intricate mind. And if we look where some of our computer systems and our technologies comes from that Asian, that Yellow Nation. And the White Nation comes with the gift of movement. And that's exploration. That's harnessing the movement of water, hydroelectric energy to create light for settlers coming into the region. They're all beautiful gifts. For us as Red Nation, we come with the gift of vision for the next 7 generations. So all of us working together with the gift of vision, with the gift of vision, with the gift of movement, with the gift of strength and determination, and with the gift of that intricate mind, all of us working together can look after Mother Earth and the water and all of those things working together. But we're so blinded by race and color and religion and all the differences, when really we're all the two-legged nation. We all are similar. There's so many similarities between all of us, and there are differences. But, you know, when a community or a whole settler nation looks upon our bodies as less than, and they devalue us, then when it comes to taking our bodies and raping our bodies and using our bodies and disposing of us, then we see the true devaluing of us as Red Nation within our own country. And that really hits home for me. I'm a mother. I'm a life giver. I have a 21-year-old, beautiful, stunning daughter who carries the language, who has all of these beautiful gifts. As a pipe carrier, she sings songs that cleanse the water. She sings songs that cleanse the air. Who's going to sing those songs? My daughter's 12 times more likely to become a victim of violence than anyone in her own sovereign territory. So for me, I have to do that work. I'm Bear Clan. I'm a mother. I'm a protector. And I'm a healing clan. And so how can we do those prevention strategies with ceremony, with lodge, with all of those things that integrate them into Western society?
Suzanne, you've highlighted so many important as well as complex concepts of how systems and structures continue to reinforce colonial ideas, and in your words, where individuals in the Indigenous community are seen as less than. And I think that point that you're making really highlights the unfortunate reality of how trafficking is happening in Indigenous communities, and as you also mentioned earlier, by mostly non-Indigenous traffickers. So Suzanne, I really appreciate you sharing with me and our viewers today, and I'm really looking forward to learning more from you and hearing how we can move forward and what can be done in regards to reconciliation. But we're going to take a short break and then come right back.
Hi everyone, Yvonne Heath here with Real Life Talks. Join me and my amazing guests weekly as we discuss dynamic topics and have amazing conversations. You won't want to miss it. And always remember to love your life to death.
Welcome back to Freedom Fighters Code Gray, a show where we discuss human trafficking. In today's episode, we are addressing several questions related to Why are Indigenous people overrepresented when it comes to human trafficking? We know that over 50% of people who are trafficked in Canada are Indigenous, yet less than 5% of the population identify as Indigenous. In the first segment of the show, Suzanne Smoke was sharing some of the reasons why this is the case, and we're so grateful to learn from her today. Suzanne, I was wondering if we can now discuss or learn from your experiences of what you think that service providers could do who are working with Indigenous people.
So I think it's really important for service providers and their funders to really understand that the areas in which we all reside as Indigenous women are our treaty territories. So Williams Treaty has 5 area First Nations. Robinson Huron Treaty territory is a huge, vast area that encompasses many First Nations. And so when an agency is sitting in the middle of Williams Treaty territory, so we have Williams Treaty territory, and there's this little agency that sits here, then the agency says, we're only serving the women that intersect right in this little box. And really understanding with the complexities of the Indian Act, loss of land, loss of culture, loss of identity, loss of connection to the community, loss of services, loss of access, all of those things, plus add barriers of colonization and racism and bias and everything within the system, really seeking services is really insurmountable for many, many Indigenous women. When we have to be fit into a little box, we're in trauma. We have intergenerational traumas from residential school, from foster care, from 60 Scoop. And when we come forward to a non-Indigenous agency to say, hey, I need help, the first thing usually is apprehension of Indigenous children. We're at the highest rate, even more so than residential schools at that time. So we have now a higher apprehension rate of Indigenous children, and they're really like an economic driver for these CAS agencies to apprehend Indigenous children at a high rate. And again, basing that apprehension on their social barometer of what poverty, all of those different things, but really understanding that colonialism put Indigenous women in poverty. We didn't do this to ourselves. We're not victims of our own demise. There's insurmountable barriers in front of us. So for the non-Indigenous agencies that are working in those little boxes, really understanding that our trauma intersects all through that. And we're not going to be stationary, and we're not going to be in that little box with a white picket fence and a roof over our head, because that was never who we were as a nation of Indigenous women. We were the leaders and clan mothers. We led the future of our communities, and that was taken away from us with the Indian Act and a foreign settler nation coming into our territory. And just really understanding, again, the impact of resource extraction in our communities. We are water carriers. It's International Water Day. We as Indigenous women protect water every day. We're water carriers. We are sacred beings. We're the only doorway with which that human spirit comes to the earth. We are sacred. And men and everyone should be looking at women in that sacred way. And so when we're violating Indigenous women, and we are the ones that are protecting the water and protecting the land, well, the land and the resources are worth more than the lives of Indigenous women in Canada. And, mining, fracking, oil, all of those things, there's a violence that comes with that. And there's a violence against Indigenous women if we're the ones that are keepers of the land and protectors of the water. We're those obstacles. And so, literally and figuratively being bulldozed and buried to get those resources. And that's sad, because if we look at our original treaties, they say that only to the depth of a plow, which means that the government and the settler nation that's now building or digging into Mother Earth and violating Mother Earth, really, they only have treaties that say to the depth of a plow. So they're already going against any constitutional or treaty right of the Indigenous nations across Turtle Island. Canada's a corporation, and I don't want to get too political, but really understanding that this legislation that was created before settlers even came to our region, with the doctrine of discovery, dehumanizing us, coming into our community, seeing our magnificent clan mothers and our women in leadership roles, and taking that away from our communities and putting men in leadership roles and giving us pass systems and herding us to reserves with no land base and no landscape, and then violating the women either further by taking away our identity and taking away those leadership roles and violating us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And the intergenerational impact of the residential schools was very controlled effort to break our family structures, to break down that beautiful family structure. We have our 7 7 roles and responsibilities through our lifetime, those 7 teachings that go with our 7 grandfathers, those 7 stages of life, right from babyhood, right through to our children, our youth, our parents, grandparents, and our elders, full circle. We all have roles and responsibilities, and how much was that impacted by the Gradual Civilization Act, by the Sterilization Act. Indigenous women had a sexual deviancy reporting system that was put in place, that if we left a partner or we had a child out of wedlock, that we could be jailed, that we would be reported on. And imagine how many women were violated or sexually assaulted way back when we didn't have all of the internet and all of the services and supports available for those communities and reserves. What was happening to the Indigenous women, with no reporting mechanisms, no way to keep them safe, no supports. We see a lot of that, and there's a lot of unsolved cases back in the 70s, 80s that are not deemed part of the MMIW. My cousin Patricia Carpenter is one of the missing and murdered from Alderville First Nation, 14 years old, who passed in 1992. Is not considered one of our missing and murdered, but we believe in my cousin Joyce. Her mother is devastated every day and lives it every day. This very much hits home in our communities all across Williams Territory. Do our women seek services from non-Indigenous agencies? Absolutely not. There's a broken relationship. There's bias. There's racism. There's fear base. If I come to you and say I'm being sexually assaulted, or there's, I'm being trafficked or anything, where are your children? We're taking your children. And so that's, as an Indigenous woman, we're the most strongest, we're the most resilient, powerful women I know, and we will do anything and we will endure anything to protect our children. And if that means suffering in silence and keeping our children with us, then that's what happens in our communities, and that's a sad reality. The non-Indigenous agencies have to do more training on colonial violence. They have to call out their own peers. Their boards and their policymakers need to engage with First Nations elders and healers and traditional knowledge keepers in healing trauma within our communities. None of our ceremonies, none of our healing methods are funded in mainstream agencies, yet those are the mainstream agencies that are funded to heal us. So if you're not engaging with First Nations healers and medicine people and elders and balancing that and valuing it as equal as Western healing in psychotherapy or art therapy or social workers or whatever it is, if you're not balancing that and valuing it, then stop taking the funding for healing Indigenous people and let us heal ourselves in our specific ways. And one of the programs that I love that I'm working with right now is called ECHO program through the CAMH. And it's they run a program that is traditional doctors, Western doctors, addiction specialists, trauma counselors, social workers. And we work with pipe carriers and medicine people and lodge keepers and medicine knowledge keepers. And they work together to diagnose and work with a client. And then they come up with a Western and a traditional diagnosis. And, so they may get medication for bipolar or depression, but they're also doing a cedar bath for a grieving ceremony and a puller medicine to pull toxins and trauma out of their bodies. Also doing grieving ceremony for the losses of whatever's happened within their families or communities through residential school. So there's so many balances between both that need to be valued, that need to be respected. And the voice of Indigenous people's been lost for 500 years since settlers arrived, for 150 years since Confederation. Someone dropped the ball, and this could have been a really magnificent, valuable friendship and partnership and equality, and it really became empowered, not in our favor for many, many years, for the last 150 or 500 years. So we're taking that space back. We've armed ourselves with truth. We've armed ourselves with treaty. We know our land rights. We know our treaty knowledge. And most importantly, our children and our children's children know the songs that cleanse the water. They know the songs that cleanse the air. They know those water songs. They're coming back. It's the 8th fire has been lit. Our children and our youth are angry and they're sad because they're seeing all this hate. Read any comment section in any newspaper and see the bias and racism. And, people can look south of the border and gasp and clutch their pearls and go, oh my, look what's happening down there. But it's happening right here every day today in Canada, from Wet'suwet'en to Elsipogtog to the Mi'kmaq, right here to Land Back Lane. It's happening. And, the resource extraction and going after the women and the children in our communities, when is enough is enough. You know, Canadian settlers sit on 98% of the land base. All of us collectively as First Nations sit on too. Yet where are the pipelines going through our territories? Where's the water and fracking through our territories? You know, it's ecocide, it's femicide, it's all tied to the land and the water. When does the value of our bodies, when is the value of Indigenous women heard and valued within Canadian society? People can talk about reconciliation all they want, but that's just a buzzword. Our women are still falling. And when I say that, they're not falling. They're being pushed, they're being beaten, they're being raped, they're being tortured. And that's a horrifying, horrifying realism that we face every single day. And so when I say agencies need to hold themselves accountable around that racism and bias and get training in reconciliation and what does colonial violence really look like, that before, you know, when women come to them for service delivery, leave your stuff at the door, check yourselves and check your peers that are servicing Indigenous women, because all it takes is one person, one weak link in that chain of offensive support, and our women are walking away and they're going to be in a life and death situation. And so really just training them and really understanding we have to build this right relationship and understand and value the voice and the traditional knowledge of Indigenous women. We are magnificent as a nation and we are sacred. We have a womb, we have a right to be here.
Suzanne, you've highlighted once again so many important things for our viewers from the 60 Scoop. And we know that, you know, over 50% of people who are trafficked have been either in the child welfare system or connected to it in some way. You've highlighted how there's such a need for holistic healing and cultural sensitive and appropriate support systems. You've talked about the need for education and training for service providers and for people, in your words, to check themselves, you know, to examine their biases and attitudes and to challenge their assumed constraints to create safe spaces. Really briefly, I was just wondering if there was anything that you would like to share within the 30 seconds or so.
Just that I would really like to believe that the majority of Canadians really don't understand how deeply embedded this racism is, and that I'm not calling everybody in Canada racist, but there are biases and there are stereotypes, and Canadians really need to reevaluate what they've been taught, because they were duped during the residential school system. They were duped during the 60s Scoop, and what's happened to Indigenous people, it's Canadians' role to read the TRC report, to read the MMIW reports, understand that vast violence against Indigenous women and where we are today. And you know, we all have to work together and value each other. And, you know, I have a beautiful, stunning daughter that I love, and it's my utmost gift of life. And I need Canadians to value her just as much as I do.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Suzanne, for helping to highlight today the value and worth of each Indigenous person and of each person and our need to move towards that as a country. I've learned so much from you today, Miigwech. For those of you who are listening today and you're in a situation of danger, if it's safe for you to do so, please call 911. If you'd like to access information or support related to human trafficking, you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline 24/7 at 1-833-900-1010. You can also reach out to Muskoka Sexual Assault Services and their crisis line at 1-800-461-2929. Or if you need support in York Region, you can reach out to the Women's Support Network at 1-800-263-6734. And if you are being trafficked and are in need of support in York Region, you may call 905-758-5285. Thanks so much for tuning in to Freedom Fighters Code Grey, and we hope to catch you next time.